Phillips with us, who will be talking about coaching in the customer and coaching in the executives through the No Squander. This is some housekeeping items. This is a 1-hour recorded webinar. Any technical questions you have, you can call 888-799-9666 at extension 2. Participants are muted at this time, and please use the questions feature at the end to submit questions. Additionally, Kevin will be having asking some questions that you can type in our chat box that we have provided on there. So anytime that you do have something that he wants response to, you can type your answer in the chat screen. This webinar is approved for 1 SHRM professional development credit, and we will give you that code and number at the end. So we are so thankful once again to have Kevin Phillips join us today. He is a 25-year corporate executive in marketing, sales, service, and technology. Kevin Phillips is a VP of Customer Experience and Creative Operations at mSpark, an advertising company specializing in integrated mail and digital campaigns. Kevin also founded Build Them Up, a campaign equipping leaders to improve organizational results by investing in the people who create them. He is a certified executive coach and leadership developer, helping clients increase profitability and navigate challenges of rapid growth. Thank you so much, Kevin. We're so excited that you're here, and take it away.
Thank you, Alice. I'm excited to be here. It's fun to be with this crowd, and I have been here a few times before, and several of you have connected with me outside of the workshop, and I have enjoyed getting to know you. Today, we're going to talk about coaching, but not just coaching. We're going to be talking about coaching executives, and they have some unique attributes. We'll also talk about coaching high potentials or emerging leaders. And I refer to this as coaching them through the no squander zone, because so much it is true that we all have potential. And if we don't tackle that potential with deliberation, it will get squandered. And that is a travesty for the person. It's a travesty for the organization that the person is part of. So that's the notion here, is that we don't want someone that we're coaching to squander the potential they have. So what we'll be doing, we're going to talk about whether someone is ready or at what point are they ready. But then we're also going to talk about what are some things that you as a coach can do to encourage or accelerate growth. And we'll also talk about what are some things that inhibit growth and what you as a coach can do to tackle those as well. Let's begin by just asking, and please use the chat feature here, what is it that you think is different about coaching an executive or an emerging leader than coaching a team member or someone who you might be mentoring just in a normal way in the organization? How is it that executives or emerging leaders are different or present some different challenges? So use your chat to share your thoughts. One way is we know that coaches very often are very accomplished. Excuse me, not coaches, executives are very accomplished. They already have a list of great things on their resume. I see that you've Julie said that you may not know the emerging leader or the executive very well. Might be the first time working with them. That's true. They have more coming at them. They're busy. They may be very overwhelmed. They may not understand why they're in coaching. I've seen that so often. Someone has signed them up for coaching. They don't think they need to be coached. That's true. They may also be someone who's been a high potential for a while. So they may have moved around a lot, and the organization sees they're being moved around. And so they have some idea that they're being groomed. And sometimes that creates jealousy. Any other thoughts? What about a high potential? What might be different about a high potential? Sometimes people who know their high potential Sometimes ego can get in the way. Sometimes coaching is seen as negative. I've actually had people hire me to be a coach and they didn't want anyone to know because they were afraid it would be viewed negatively. That's so true. They believe their past behavior has made them successful. Yes, that is true, and less open to changing their ways. If it worked in the past, why if it's not broken, why change it? They may not see that it's broken. Hypos may think it means that they will get promoted as a result. They think that there's a guarantee at the end of a coaching engagement. That's true, Beth. That is absolutely true. They are usually very driven and they're used to getting big results fast. And so they often are impatient. I'm kind of impatient, so I can associate with that as well. They might feel like they're just checking a box to the point that somebody made. They're just climbing the ladder and checking boxes as they go. So they may not treat it with the sincerity that it's required. They may also have allies among the executives who are working politics behind the scenes. It's amazing how political things get as you rise through an organization. And you don't always realize how somebody might be doing something behind the scenes. And so there's often politics involved as well. These are all great. Let's jump in and talk about how these factors impact the coaching. For an organization, these executives and high potentials represent the future of that organization. And it's important that you invest in them. It's important that you develop them and grow them, because if any of us, I like to say it this way, when you're done learning, you're done. And if you're the leader of an organization, that's true of the people on your team. When they're done learning, your organization's done. It creates a ceiling. In fact, when you're done learning, you've created a ceiling for your organization. No organization wants to have a ceiling forced upon them. You want to grow, and you want to explore all the potential that the organization has, and the potential of the organization is the sum of the potential of the people in it. And that potential is the difference maker. And that is why we talk about the squander zone. You don't want to squander it. So for purposes of today, think of an executive or high potential that you will be coaching. It might be somebody that you already are coaching. It might be somebody that you've been asked to coach. What I'd like for you to do is use that as a lens through which you listen to our conversation today. I've reached the point in my life where I've recognized that multitasking isn't really a thing. It's just doing a lot of little things one at a time very, very fast. And very often, the more I try to multitask, the less effective I've become. And I'm in a mastermind group. I'm originally from Atlanta. I recently moved to Birmingham. But as part of COVID, this mastermind group that I was part of in Atlanta went virtual. And now we continue to be virtual. And we were reading a book together called Essentialism. And it has really changed the way I look at how I prioritize my time and my day. And I've really realized the power of one and focus. When I read a book now, I don't try to remember all 17 great and amazing things that I have learned in there. I try to really focus on one, because learning needs application to create change. And if I try to work on all 17 of those things at once, I probably won't accomplish any of them. So I really focus on one. When I go to a seminar like this, I try to focus on the one thing that I think will make the biggest difference. So I'm going to ask you today, in the lens of someone or a conversation that you're having, a coaching session that you may be having, think of the one thing that you hear today that you think can move the needle on that one. So I think the first question you have to ask when you're coaching someone is whether they are ready to be coached or not. And the reason I think that's true is if they're not ready, the coaching really will fall on deaf ears. The purpose of coaching is growth, and growth means change. And change is not easy. And so we're going to talk about 4 readiness gates that will help you as a coach assess whether someone is ready to wrestle with that change, whether they're committed enough to do that hard work that's required. Because if they're not committed, they won't change. So let's talk about the first of those, and that is, do they see the need? If you don't see the need for something, you won't fix it. You won't work on it. And I have to tell you, early in my career, I had a boss. It was actually my boss's boss. And she's retired, and I still talk to her every 6 weeks or so. She made that kind of impact on my life. But back then, I knew that I was a high potential. I knew that the company was investing in me. They put me on this interdepartmental project, and here I am off to the races. And there are people from all these departments on there. We're working together for about a year and a half. And we're maybe a month into this at this point. And I'm regularly meeting with this executive who is sponsoring our project. And she was encouraging me, giving me coaching. And I knew she was investing in me. But I had a meeting with her one day. It was just me and her. And we talked about business. And then she said, Kevin, do you want a career with this company? And I said, oh, of course. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking I might be promoted. I mean, maybe she's going to go ahead and say, hey, we see enough potential here. We're just going to go ahead and promote you. So I'm getting excited. She let there be silence. And then she said, Kevin, at the rate you're going, you're not going to have much of a career here. And at first I thought she was joking. But then I realized she wasn't smiling. It led to a conversation. She gave me some feedback. It was feedback I had kind of heard before, but not clearly. And I didn't believe the feedback. I rejected it. I didn't see myself that way, and I didn't see other people reacting to me in the way that she described. But I trusted her, and I didn't think she was making it up. So I went back and I stewed over it for a couple of days, and there was a guy on the team who I had a lot of confidence in. He was probably about 10 years ahead of me in his career. We talked about it, and he said, it's true, Kevin. And I said, why didn't you tell me? He's like, well, would it have done any good? And the truth is it wouldn't. It took Gail shaking me a little bit. And he and I made a deal. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Carol Burnett show, but she used to, on the show, she would end the program by, it was a signal to her grandmother, I think, if I remember the story right, she'd pull her earlobe down. And so he and I made a deal that when we were in a group meeting and I was doing it and unaware of the reaction of others, he would pull his ear. And that would be a signal for me to see the need, because I didn't see the need. And you can't start this journey of growth if you don't see the need. That's the first readiness gate. Do they want change? They may see the need, but they may not want change. I had lunch Monday, and I was sitting next to this table of businessmen, and I heard one of them explaining, apparently he thinks he's too close to retirement to change, and they had a new leader in place, and he was belly aching about all the changes that were going on. And I don't know anything about the details. I don't know if they're good changes or bad changes, but he basically said, I'm too old to change. I think what he was saying is, I'm done. I'm done learning. And when you're done learning, you're done. If they don't want to change, it doesn't matter if they see the need. And so they have to want it. And then the question is their heart ready? There's a sincerity factor here you have to consider. And I might want change, but if I don't really want the change, I think someone said in the chat something about, it not being sincere about it, or just wanting to check a box. And as a coach, you want to assess, do they see the need? Do they want the change? Are they sincere about it? And then finally, are they really committed to it? I always tell people, if I'm asked to mentor them, or if they're working for me and I'm coaching them, or if they've hired me, look, my time's valuable, your time's valuable. The company's resources are valuable. I am willing to invest in you. And to the extent I have the checkbook of the company, I'm willing for the company to invest in you, but only if you are investing in yourself. And I will very often be blunt about it. I'll say, if I see that you're spending time outside of work, if you're spending your own money to grow, that's a good signal to me that you're committed. If you're doing things outside of work, that's a really good signal, especially if you're doing it over time. And I'm not saying you always have to do it that way, but you want to make sure, are they going to invest the hard work? These 4 readiness gates, I think, are critically important. I'm just curious if you will offer in chat, have you seen these examples of these where this stops someone's growth? And no matter, you can send people to classes, you can put it in mastermind groups, you can send them mentoring, and it doesn't work because of these. Does this resonate with you? Anyone? Okay. They are key. I agree. So this is the first stage, is, are they ready? I love this quote by Jim Quick because it gets to the point of this. If an egg is broken by outside force, life ends. But if it's broken by inside force, life begins. Change is an inside job. Growth is an inside job. As a coach, you can't change for someone. In fact, as a boss, you can't change for someone. As a parent, you can't grow for your child. As a teacher, you can't learn for your students. Growth is always an inside job. And as a coach, the best way for us to help somebody is to help make sure that we're helping them do it themselves. That's what coaching is about. Remember that person that I asked you to think of, or that coaching conversation you know that you have to have? Think about that in light of these readiness gates. And does that person satisfy all those gates, or are they stuck on one of those? Because if they're stuck on one or multiples of those, that's the starting point for the coaching conversation. One of my favorite people, who is now a friend, used to work for me. And it's a long story, but the short story is I inherited her in a role that I was in, and she was incredibly smart, but no one wanted to work with her because she had some aspects of her performance and her interactions that were just difficult. And I was early in my career, so I didn't really know what I was doing, but I did have some HR professionals who were helping me work through it. Some of the leaders wanted her terminated, and I just didn't feel like I could terminate someone without making an attempt. So we partnered together with HR to try to help her. And I look back on it now, and I think the most effective thing I did was not talk to her about going through specific conversations and going through some kind of script or asking a lot of questions about it. I think the most important thing I did is I held up the mirror in front of her. I helped her see herself so that she could see the need, because she couldn't complete the journey until she saw the need. She and I are friends now. It's been a long time since that happened. And we laugh about some of the ugly moments that we shared together in that, but it was important to make sure she was ready. Let's talk about what are some things that you as a coach can do to accelerate growth. Now, again, these are not things that you are completely in control of. Some of them you can influence. Now, as a leader, sometimes you're coaching someone and you're in the organization, you may have budget control, you may have other authority where you can't actually do some things, but very often the coach doesn't have any formal authority, may not even have any budget to do something. So very often you're heavily dependent on influence, but there are still so many things you can do. And let's just begin by making sure that we're aligned on the starting point. And this gets back to that mirror conversation I was talking about earlier. If you don't know where you're supposed to start, it's going to be hard to have a journey. Now, I guess it's always, if we're going to go on a vacation, you know where you are. So you know what your starting point is. You just have to decide where you're going to go, and you get the GPS out and you put that address in, and it'll tell you which way to go. But with growth, sometimes you don't know what your starting point is. And if you don't know what your starting point is, if you don't know what you're trying to fix, it'll get really sloppy pretty fast. I've seen a lot of folks, and sometimes I have been working on the wrong things. Have any of you seen somebody, or perhaps yourself, you've invested in growth in the wrong things? It's not the big issue that needs to get fixed. And sometimes it's not even a big issue. Sometimes there is a fatal flaw or a blind spot that is really preventing someone from moving forward or performing. But more often than not, I find it's not something as big as a blind spot or a fatal flaw. It's just something that's hampering their effectiveness. It's put a ceiling on their potential. But if they don't understand it clearly, they won't know how to proceed. This is something else I have found is often an aspect of someone's growth that we often assume that people know how to get feedback, how to react to feedback, but most people struggle with it. Let's talk first about asking for feedback. I think a lot of us just assume if somebody has feedback, they'll give it to us. We assume that because there are people in our life who are equipped to give us feedback, and that feedback may often come in the form of criticism, and it can be painful. In fact, sometimes we have parents or maybe teachers from high school or maybe coaches who were hypercritical. They thought that the best way to build up someone was to tear them down. One of my favorite workshops I teach is you don't have to hashtag tear them down to hashtag build them up. I know the Marines, that's their technique. That is exactly how they build a Marine. They want to break you down so they have a clean canvas. But outside of that, that's not how coaching works. That's not how you raise a child effectively. That's not how you train someone. That's not how you coach someone to become a leader. That's not how a leader coaches someone to better performance. And asking for feedback is something we're not taught to do. I love to ask for feedback. I'm surprised how often it is met with surprise. Sometimes it's like, you really want my opinion? Yes. I often, when I do end of year reviews for my employees, after all that's done, after ratings are done, all the comments are done, I say, okay, that's done. It's closed out. I've already submitted it to HR. I cannot change anything that's there. I have a question for you. I want feedback on me. And you open the floor like that, sometimes people will talk, but they'll generally tell you the things they think you want to hear. That's not the most useful feedback. So what I do is, before I get in there, I try to think of what are the things I know I need to be working on. Other people have given me feedback, and I'll have some prepared questions. I'll ask for specific feedback on certain things. I might ask, for example, someone that I was working with a couple of years ago had given me feedback that they didn't understand my advice to them. They didn't understand, they were working for me. And so when I was giving them direction, they didn't understand the words I was using. So in that case, I would be very specific and say, when we started that last project, can you give me some feedback on how well I communicated what we were trying to accomplish? When you ask specific questions, it makes it easier for people to give you feedback. It gives them a starting point for the feedback, but it also makes it okay for you. I think it makes it okay for them to give you feedback that they think you might be alarmed to hear or not want to hear. But also, you have to talk to people about, how do you receive feedback? Because our natural reaction very often is to argue it, to debate it, to make excuses, to explain away why it was the way it was or why it seemed the way it was. But the truth is, and we all know, that someone's reality, whether it is completely founded in fact or not, or whether they fully understand all the perspectives that were involved, their reality is their reality, and that's how people respond. So if someone sees it a certain way, that is the way it was to them. It's like going to the theater. There are a lot of seats in a theater. You can get 1,000 people in the same theater seeing the exact same play and leave with very different experiences. Why? They have different perspectives. Some of those perspectives are informed by their personal choices. Some people like musicals, some people hate musicals. Some people like Shakespeare, some people like more modern plays. But it can also be, which seat are you sitting in? If you're sitting in the middle, front row, you'll see something very different than if you're sitting in the back in the middle. If you're sitting on left of stage, you'll see something very different than someone who's sitting in the middle. You'll see what's going on backstage. You'll see them getting the props ready. But if you're in the middle, you probably won't see all that. When I was a kid, I loved the circus. We went every year, but we couldn't afford front row seats, but that's what I wanted. And one year, I don't remember the circumstance, but my dad we went with another family. We all ended up on the front row. I was so excited until I was so disappointed, because the circus is such a different experience from the front row. Because it turns out those beautiful and fun elephants, they stink. And those beautiful costumes are tattered. And the makeup that looks so cool on the clowns in the back is exaggerated in person. It was a completely different experience, but I saw the same circus that somebody sitting 15 or 20 rows back did. And that's why it's important for people to understand feedback. Just listen and don't respond. Don't argue it. Express appreciation. And then go back and think about it. Try to absorb what you've heard. And you'd be surprised how many executives don't know how to do this. In their head, even if they're not saying it, they're very often, well, they just don't know, so-and-so happened, that's why that is it. Well, there's this financial issue they were not aware of. They're missing the value of the feedback before they even process it. Something else is important is to make sure that people are uncomfortable. Learning doesn't occur where we're comfortable. In fact, almost every learning I can think of, it was uncomfortable. In school, when I was trying to learn algebra, or I'm a pianist, when I was trying to learn to play the piano, the discipline of getting my fingers used to hitting those keys. None of that was fun. It wasn't exciting, but it was necessary for me to get to the point where now I can sit down and play the piano. Or I use algebra every day. This past weekend, I was with some family, and my cousin, he has a 18, 16, and 14-year-old, and they were lamenting all the math they're having to take. And I was explaining, I'm in advertising, I'm in marketing. I use algebra every day. And they were shocked to hear that. If you are too comfortable, you won't be growing. But you have to be careful as a coach. You want to get people to the edge of their comfort zone, but you don't want to push them over the edge. There's a balancing act here, so you have to pay attention. If someone feels vulnerable, if someone feels that there's some risk that they might fail at something, that's the point at which learning can occur. If things are so safe that there's no risk, there's probably not going to be a lot of growth there. But I think you also want to keep in mind, especially as think about an executive, is there's a lot at stake. There's a large organization, a lot of people watching them. Their decisions have a much wider impact than an individual contributor in the organization. So you're coaching someone through something where there could be some failure. So you also want to make sure that you have a risk plan, or not that you, but that they have a risk plan. So you want to talk to them about, okay, what if this does result in a mistake or a failure? What's the plan? What's the backup plan? How do we mitigate against that? And that's a significant part of coaching. I also think it's helpful for the executive or high potential to allow themselves to be vulnerable. It's helpful for them to think about there's a net underneath the trapeze. And they need to be the ones who are figuring out what the net is. But they might not always consider that in the process. So as a coach, it's just a great idea to help them think that through. Something else that I found incredibly valuable, and I think this is probably more true for high potentials than executives. It's one thing to learn something. There's an intellectual exercise involved, and it's important. But there's an application piece of this for growth to occur. For someone to be able to repeat over and over, to create new habits, they have to practice it. They have to do it. And when you're taking a high potential, it's a great idea to put them in the room with the executives that you think they can become. Put them in the room when decisions are being bantered back and forth, when data is being reviewed, when options are being evaluated, when decisions are being made. It's great for them to watch, and then they can get to the point where they can actually even participate, especially if one of those executives is also a mentor in the process. Being in the room is a great way also for them to see how people communicate and how they deal with conflict at a very different level. Things that in an executive conference room happen very differently than they do throughout the rest of the proverbial building. And there's a certain amount of politics that's involved. Where two or three people are gathered, I'm convinced that's the definition of where politics starts. It's all over the place, but especially in an executive boardroom where there are a lot of egos and people trying to get ahead. It's great for them to see it before they're in it. So being in the room is a great way to help someone grow. I love this quote by the Navy SEAL Marcus Luttrell: "You play the way you practice." And so I think sometimes executives think executive coaching is about talking to someone, talking about your feelings, talking about how you feel about it. And then they want to go off and they don't try it. They don't put it to practice, and they don't come back and share how that went. You've got to go try it. You've got to go practice. You got to make yourself vulnerable. You have to make some mistakes along the way too. I mean, granted, executives are very often smooth and polished. They're often very good learners. So that's an advantage, but you need to go practice it, try it out. Something else that's important is not only to practice it, but to evaluate the experience that you had. I think it was John Maxwell that said that experience is useless. Evaluated experience is priceless. That might not be a direct quote, but something like that. It is true that if you have the experience, but you don't go back and look at why you had the experience, why did it happen that way? Why did it play out that way? What could have been different? What didn't go as well as expected? That is how you learn from those failures, if you will, those mistakes, those missteps. So if you think about all these things together, making sure you know where you are, or not you, making sure that the coachee knows where they're starting from and what they're working on, making sure that they know how to get feedback and how to receive it, making sure that they're at a place of vulnerability where learning can occur, but not at a place where they fall off the edge, where risk is considered and it's mitigated. Put them in the arena. You don't learn to play baseball in a conference room. You might study some plays, but you're going to get out there and you're going to swing the bat You're going to pitch the ball. You're going to catch the ball. You're going to run some bases. That's how you learn to play. And then you're going to practice it over and over. You're going to swing many, many times. I was just reading a book recently and was talking about, it's that book I mentioned, Essentialism. And it talks about the habits that Michael Phelps and his coach created for him much, much earlier in his career than when he was even an Olympic hopeful. And it was what he did every morning when he woke up, what he did every time he would go practice, what he did every time he had a meet, what he did every night before he went to bed. And he repeated those with great discipline over and over, all the way through the Olympics. Because when you create muscle memory, you move those actions, if you will, into part of your brain where you have to think less about it. And in fact, it frees your brain up to work on other things. And so that's why practice is so important. And then you evaluate it. Part of that evaluation is to get feedback. All of this is related. Let me stop here and just ask you to consider that coaching conversation that you have in front of you and how any of those suggestions can influence how you go about it. Is there something, some tidbit in what we just talked about that will help you with that coachee? Let's talk about some barriers, some obstacles, things that can get in the way, things that can even kill growth, and how you as a coach can be on the lookout for them. We mentioned earlier something about being overwhelmed. Executives are often overwhelmed. They have a lot going on at work. By the time you're an executive, the things that hit your desk, all the easy answers have been resolved. It's the difficult things, and it's not one or two. It is many things. Every day is a new surprise. Some days you have multiple surprises. It's not only from your organization, but it's from other organizations. It could be from external organizations. And on top of that, you're a husband or a wife, and you have a spouse at home, and you have children, and their lives are integrated into yours, of course, and they have chaos. They're struggling with algebra, or their baseball team didn't do so well over the weekend, and the child is depressed, and you're trying to help them out of that. Got a lot of balls in the air, so to speak. And here, your leadership is asking you to work with this coach to develop something. Too many things going on. Or it could be that you're trying to fix too many things at once. So you have some people who want to learn and grow. And so they say, I need to improve my communication skills, and I need to improve my decision-making skills, and I need to improve my strategic skills. If you do all those at once, you probably won't get very far. Imagine, if you will, that you have 1,000 basketballs on one side of a basketball court. And the goal is to move all 1,000 basketballs to the other side of the basketball court. You can get 2, 3, maybe 4 balls in your arms at once. And you could do this one or two ways. You could go get those 3 or 4 balls and move them 12 inches and go back and get 3 or 4 more and move them 12 inches and just keep doing that till you move all 1,000 balls 12 inches. And then you start the process over. And eventually you'll get to the other side of the court. That's going to take a while. If somebody's watching it, they're going to be scratching their head. You're going to be so impatient. It's going to feel like you're not getting much done. But you could take those 3 or 4 balls and just go all the way to the end and then go back and get 3 or 4, and you could feel progress. A lot of times, how you go about things can change how effectively you do them. And I believe if you work on one really big thing at a time, you'll make more progress than if you work on 3 things a little at a time. Too many things can get in the way. And as a coach, you have influence over that. Another thing I often see is people try to figure out how to take their weakness and turn it into a strength. This is especially true where that executive or that hypo works for someone who's very gifted in a certain area. It might be that they work for someone who's a master communicator, and that's not their strength. And so they want to be the person that they work for. And they work really hard to try to become that master communicator when that's not their strength. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that working on your weak areas or your developmental areas is something that shouldn't be on the list. But I think when you're trying to turn something like that into a strength, you're knocking your head up against a wall. What you want to do, if you have a weak area, you still work on it, but your goal is to smooth out rough edges and to get to a level of competence where it does not become a stumbling block. But it's going to be difficult to turn something into a natural strength if it's not a natural strength. And I've seen so many people struggle with this and feel so disappointed with themselves. They feel like a failure. And sometimes I think as a leader, I sometimes am guilty of trying to turn someone into me, and I should know better. But I'm very often trying to help somebody, and I realize at some point I'm trying to coach them into thinking like me or handling this exactly like me. And it's not that the way I've handled it is wrong. It's just that is not the only way, and it might not be their strength. I believe if you really take your strengths, I think ought to be the top of the list. Take your weak areas, or if you have blind spots, you want to keep them from being obstacles. So you want to grow in those areas so that they don't get in the way. But then take those strengths and become exceptional for that. Be known for that. You can be a shining star in the area of your strengths. You probably will never be a shining star in the areas of your weakness. Does the organization frown on failure? And maybe they don't announce it in the newsletter, but is their reaction to failure one that would say, hey, don't let this happen to you? Growth is difficult if you don't have space to practice it and make mistakes. And I've seen that so often, and I'm embarrassed to admit that sometimes when I've been the leader, I've been party to trying to help people grow, and then I don't reward the risk taking. In fact, when the mistake occurs, I overreact to it. It was a perfectly logical thing to expect could happen, and maybe I didn't have a sufficient plan in place to mitigate it. That's on me as the leader. Now, as a coach, I realize you're not always in control of that, but when I'm the leader, I am in control of making sure there's a risk mitigation plan. And I think this is a part that if you're coaching, let's say if a company has hired you to coach, or maybe your own company has asked you to coach one of the executives, this is something that's important to make sure that the support structure around that executive or that high potential is thinking about this. And it's a deliberate conversation I try to have. When I'm hired to be an executive coach, sometimes there are two bosses, right? You've got the coachee, but then they're not the one who hired you. It might be the CEO who's hired you. So in that case, I try to talk to the CEO and make sure that this is something that they've considered. I understand where they stand on it. And I want to make sure the executive understands where their CEO sees it. If the coachee is the one who's hired me or has asked for the coaching, there might be less control or influence over how the organization thinks about it. But it's a conversation you need to have, because this could be disruptive to growth if you take a chance and then you get sat on, so to speak, when it doesn't go well. Here's something else I often see with executives. They very often have enormous natural potential, natural gifts in ways that they don't even have to work at certain things. And they make it look easy. And that often is what has propelled them to where they are. This is especially true with entrepreneurs. When I was in Atlanta, I loved that it is a hub for entrepreneurs, and I got to spend a good bit of time with some of the entrepreneurs there. There's a hub there in Buckhead, and these people are so gifted in some ways. Those gifts can also become stumbling blocks because they can rely on them so heavily that they don't develop the other attributes. Sometimes they don't surround themselves with people who supplement them where they're weak. But I very often see when I'm coaching someone, when things get tough, when there's a mess and they're in the middle of that mess, instead of pursuing the learning, instead of pushing the learning, they will just rely on how they're gifted. And I'm not suggesting they shouldn't use those natural gifts, but you don't want to let them become a crutch. And as a coach, it's something you'll probably see that they won't see. Something else I often see with people who are higher up in an organization, an executive, it's also true of people who are high potential. There's a certain degree of confidence, but often it's hubris, it's arrogance. And that is incredibly destructive. Arrogance almost always closes the door on growth because you don't think you need it. But then I've also realized over the years that sometimes arrogance and hubris is really more a mask for insecurity. And I know that seems crazy, but sometimes people who are insecure, especially if they're in a high profile role like an executive or high potential. They don't want anyone to know that they think they're not worthy or they think they're not as good as their persona. It is shocking how that gets in the way of their growth. Because, in fact, I mentioned people have hired me to coach them, but they don't want anybody to know they're being coached because they don't want anyone to think that they're vulnerable or that they're imperfect or that they have areas that they can grow in. And this gets in the way. These masks get in the way. And as a coach, I'm not saying you need to be, hunting this, but I think you do want to keep an eye open for behaviors that would suggest that there's a mask in place or that someone's hiding behind confidence when really it's an area that might need some focus. Sometimes it is because there's a misperception. I am shocked at how many times I talk to someone and in some cases I've known them for a while and I mention that I see they're so gifted in a certain way and they have no idea. No one has ever said that to them. Confidence is such a significant part of growth and high performance. And with executives, you would never expect that confidence is an issue. I see it all the time. In fact, there was an executive that I worked for. She was probably one of the smartest people I've ever met and was one of the most amazing communicators I had ever seen. And before I worked for her, I saw her on stage and was just so impressed. I always wished that I could be a communicator like her. But when I went to work for her, I realized every day she battled insecurities, and only that little small group of people like her direct reports even knew it. When she was going to go get on stage, it took weeks to get her ready, and she would be backstage physically ill because she felt like she shouldn't be on that stage. And I was shocked to find that out. Most people would have no idea. And so as a coach, I think you want to be observant for this kind of behavior. Here's another one to keep in mind. No one can grow for anyone. Just like a mom and dad is not even in control of an infant. The infant decides when they wake up. The infant decides whether they can get on that call because they might be screaming at the time and you can't just make the baby stop. Only the coachee can grow for themselves. And as a coach, your job is to help provide direction, help make sure that they have resources available, but you can't do the learning for them. But here's something I noticed with coaches. They almost always have mentors, sponsors. Sometimes you don't even know about it until halfway through the coaching engagement. You realize that they're talking to someone else who's out talking to someone else who's talking to someone else. And they very often rely on these sponsors to avoid growing. Instead of getting better at this, someone else is cleaning up behind you or they're running interference for you. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have mentors or to have sponsors. It's a great thing. And I think if you're building a coaching program, you want to design that into the program. But what you don't want, again, you don't want that to be a crutch. You don't want the natural gifts to become a crutch. You don't want other people to become a crutch, preventing them from growth. And it's something that I've found it's not obvious. And so when I realize it, I'm often realizing when I look back, the signs were there, I just had missed them. So important. And finally, executives and high potentials want big results and they want it fast. It's just the nature of people who are climbing the ladder or who have climbed the ladder. They live life on the stage in the spotlight, and there are so many things that they're juggling. They want results. They want to build that resume. But growth isn't something that happens on a date. It doesn't happen when you go to a class. It doesn't happen after 3.7 coaching sessions. It is a process, and everybody goes through it at a different pace and in a different way. And I think if they understand that up front, if the organization that's supporting them understands that it is a process and their expectations are set, you have a climate where growth can occur. But if there's an expectation that in 6 months something's going to change, that's probably an expectation that won't be met. I realize that you have to put a timeline on coaching engagements. I get that. And I also get that there's, organizations don't have unlimited budget, so they can't just let something go on forever. So I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting you need to have an understanding, and you don't, you're the coach. The coachee and the people who might have hired you to coach them need to understand that there's a process here And what you're looking for is progress over time. Small steps with consistency equals change. Big steps are unusual. They can happen, but they're unusual. And over only a few steps, unlikely. Small steps over time, consistent, that's change. So I ask you again to think about that person who you have a coaching conversation with and how those obstacles might be something that where you can help them in their growth. And then finally, all of us have hidden talent, but until it's discovered, it can't be developed. And until it's developed, it won't make a difference in their professional lives, their personal lives, or in their involvement in a team or in a corporation. That is the risk if we squander that potential, is that we won't make the difference. They won't make the difference. As coaches, we make difference through others. And I love that. I realize that no matter how amazing each of us are, there's a limit to how much of a difference we can make. There are only so many hours in the day. There's only so many dollars in your budget. But when you invest in other people, then you multiply the impact that you can make through others. And that's what coaches do, is you help others. And even better, when you help them help others, think about the exponential impact that you are having by looking at that potential and helping somebody turn that potential into reality, into a difference. So if you're interested in connecting with me, I'm a Southern boy, so you can go to howdykevin.com, and there are several ways you can, if you're interested in anything. I work for an advertising company. If you have interest in that, you can connect with me there. You can connect with me in my coaching leadership development business. You can follow me on social media. And if you'd like today's slides, you can go to kevinphillipsslides.com and provide your information, and you'll have a copy of the slides today. And with that said, let's open this up to some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Several people are asking if this is going to be recorded, and yes, we did record it. So we will also be sending out the recording link as well. So thank you. They're saying it's so much great information. They want to make sure they go back over the information. So thank you for that. We do have some questions that are coming in. One of them is, how do you deal with someone who thinks coaching is all fluff, but is being forced to go through it?
My approach is not to tackle somebody head on at first, but when it becomes obvious to me that someone I'm coaching feels that way about it, I will confront them about it. I'm not suggesting you would want to be rude, but I think you should say, I see this behavior or this reaction, and I might be interpreting it wrong, but it looks like to me you think that this is just fun and games here, and that I'm just here to help you check a box. And I don't believe that's the case. So let's talk about it. I find that most executives, they're at the point in their career where they don't need hints, and they don't usually give hints. And so if you bring it up like that, they'll talk to you about it. Where you might, if you're talking to high potentials, sometimes they're trying to play politics and they haven't figured it all out yet. So they might be a little bit less forthcoming, but you have to talk about it. If they think it's fluff, they're not going to get much out of it. So that gets back to those readiness gates. If they think it's fluff, they're not ready.
Perfect. And then what's the difference between a supervisor as a coach and a third party coach?
The reporting relationship is part of that. There are certain dynamics when someone reports to you. You're making a decision about what they work on every day. You are evaluating their performance. You are making decisions about their salary and their bonus. That obviously is going to have an implication in how they react to you, how they talk to you, how forthcoming they are. I think over time, you can develop a relationship with a direct report where some of that is mitigated, but there'll always be some level of that. Where there's a third-party coach, there often is a concern if the company has hired you to coach the executive. There's the concern that because someone else is paying you, you might reveal things that has been discussed in coaching. Now, every coach is going to handle that differently. If someone's hiring me to coach someone else, I make sure that they understand I am not there to go do Sherlock Holmes investigative work for them. If there's and I've never had an HR person ask me for this, but I'll always say, if your HR is trying to document something, I am not a source for that. What happens in our coaching sessions will be between me and the executive and not you. Are you good with that? And if they're not, I've never been in a situation where they told me they were not good with that. I was asked a couple of times where there was a perceived to be a severe problem and they thought they may have to let an executive go. And I was asked to come coach them, but it was clear to me that what they really wanted me to do was coach them, but they didn't think it was going to work. So they wanted me to help document something. And I did not take that because I felt like I didn't feel like I could be effective in that. For a third party, I think it's important to say to the coachee up front, I'm here for you. I might have been hired by the CEO. Here's the agreement that I have with him or her, just so they understand that.
Perfect. Another question. One of our executives is a high achiever, but he has the tendency to bully his way when stressed. It's well known that our CEO asked HR to help him. The challenge is that he doesn't see the problem and is strongly supported by other executives. Help.
The term bullying is used so much these days, isn't it? And it means so many things to different people. But we all know for many years before the term became so widely used that many behaviors we've seen in the workplace are some form of bullying. Very often people don't realize their aggressive stance, sometimes the way they communicate, they're just, there's no fluff in their communication. There's no, hey, let's chat, let's just get down to business. Sometimes that's perceived as bullying. Sometimes a project manager, for example, might be following up and that's viewed as bullying. But in this particular case, it sounds like that it's been communicated in some form or fashion well enough that people outside of the executive team knows. This is right back to that readiness gate, and you have to hold up the mirror. Because they're not going to get very far until they can see the behavior. It kind of gets back to that where my friend Mark was pulling his ear so that I could be aware at the moment that I was doing something. I had no perception of it. I didn't realize people were rolling their eyes at me. They were. Gail had told me that people were rolling their eyes. I hadn't seen any of that, but it was because I wasn't looking. And by Mark pulling the ear, he helped me see it. And I think in this case, you have to figure out how do you help that executive do that. And I realize as a coach, you're probably not in some of these meetings. So you've got to figure out how to get other people engaged in helping that person. And I would suggest that you go down the path of asking that executive to go have a conversation with other executives who are in the room when this bullying might occur, or maybe even direct reports, and acknowledge to them that he had received that feedback, but he didn't understand it. He didn't really see it. But he wasn't discounting the feedback. He just needed them to help. Hey, raise your hand. Let's have a code word. Pull your ear like Carol Burnett, whatever it is. Those are the things you got to figure out. And there's no easy answer for this without knowing the specifics. But
perfect. Thank you so much for that information. That helped. One last question. I support one of our business unit leaders. She is trying to build a culture of coaching and development, so we are always growing the next level of leaders. Any recommendations for how we should approach it?
I think any organization that wants to make it a practice, that they want to build it into their culture and build it into their business process, that's an organization that has a bright future. They're making sure that there aren't ceilings in the way. And I think that's great to hear. It's a great opportunity. I think what you're describing might be something that's not targeted toward the executive office, but it's targeted more toward the larger organization. And it might even be beyond high potentials. And I think what you want to do in that case is you probably, and it's hard to scale something like this because coaching takes time. And to do something like this, you're not going to be using third-party coaches. You're going to be using leaders in the organization. And so what you're going to have to think about is how can you scale it? And it might be that it's something you have to maybe have cohorts where every 6 months you bring in a new group of folks. But I think what you want to do is figure out how do you scale it so your organization won't be exhausted from it. So focus, on maybe a handful of things. Maybe you focus, you have a theme of the year. Maybe this year it's going to be on communication, and next year it's going to be on how to build your influence. But then not only limiting the number of topics that you're tackling in your coaching program, but also the number of people that go through it at any given moment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We also did receive a comment from one of Jim Hartsook, a longtime coach, and he said, I always tell the coachee that I will not share anything we discuss without their approval. So I think that would help eliminate it would put a barrier in the process if the person wasn't totally feeling like they were free in their
I agree with you, Jim.
to share. For sure. Excellent. Well, good. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. We really appreciate your time. For anybody else, as a reminder, please visit our website at www.talentconnections.net for more information. You will find a section of previously recorded webinars that you can view. Also, this activity is 23 UAYK4 has been approved for 1 professional development credit for recertification through SHRM. Please be sure to note the activity ID number on your recertification application form. For more information about the certification or recertification, please visit the SHRM website, and that information is up there as well. So thank you so much. Thank you very much, Kevin. This information is helpful. I just completed the Gallup Strengths Coaching class, and we'll be taking my coaching skills to the next level. I appreciate you sharing your experience and expertise with us, is a comment from one of our participants. So so thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it, for sure. Lots of great information.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.